Chapter 41. The Challenge. Tariq Harun al-Jabbo arrived in Bombay with great expectations. While he was on his way from Egypt to India, he built many golden castles in his mind. He expected his beloved Inaz to receive him as her lover and rejoice over him as her lawful husband. At last, he concluded, the days of their painful separation had come to an end and the wonderful days of their enjoyment had begun, on the day her proud and arrogant father had come and begged him to marry his Arab daughter. He expected that, his beloved Inaz would travel with him once again to the golden beaches of Goa and the newly wedded couple would relive those wonderful days all over again. This time Inaz would treat him as her matchable lover. She would no more deny him her virtue. She would treat him as her lawful husband and allow him to consummate their marriage. He remembered how much she tortured him when she refused to allow him to claim her virginity. He believed no lover except him had ever been denied what every beloved would gladly and joyfully give to her lover. After their honeymoon, Tariq decided to convince Inaz to discontinue her study in India and travel with him to Egypt and resume her medical education at the University of Cairo. He wasn't planning to reveal to her his marriage to the Egyptian girl. He decided never tell her that until she became pregnant first. Before he left Cairo, his Egyptian wife had already become pregnant. Tariq had sent her to live with her poor family in the graveyards and promised to return soon and take her out of her tomb to his beautiful apartment. He was afraid that she might bring an Egyptian boy in his absence and sleep with him. Tariq knew from the beginning his matrimony with that Arab girl was a marriage of convenience. Wherefore, neither the girl nor he had any love for one another. On that fateful day, when Inaz was badly battered by her angry parents, Tariq came to the conclusion that he lost her forever. How her proud parents had insulted and humiliated him in front of his father. Her arrogant mother called him Black Karabi and also told him on his face that Inaz would never marry a boy like him. Even his father was ridiculed and humiliated by Inaz's parents. Nevertheless, Tariq forgot all those racial remarks and insults when Mr. Ahmed Salah came in person and offered him the hand of his daughter in marriage. He knew and understood that, the proud man wouldn't have come to him and given him his daughter as a wife, if Inaz had not converted to Christianity. Inaz had put her father on the same helpless situation when she ran away from her husband in Riyadh city and fell in the hands of the cruel Saudi police. At that time, her proud father came and kissed his hands and begged him to go and prove in the Sharia court that he had divorced his wife Inaz before she married her cousin brother. In order to save his beloved Inaz from being stoned to death, he obtained through bribery a divorce certificate from a recognized Egyptian Muslim imam. But now, Tariq wondered what he should do, to convince Inaz to renounce her apostasy and re-embrace Islam. He was in great doubt about her conversion to Christianity. A girl like Inaz who was born and brought up as a Muslim and Arabic her mother tongue would never leave Islam and become a Christian unless there were some strong motives behind her sudden change. Tariq guessed two possibilities. She was either had been deceived by a promise of visa to a Western country or had been offered a lot of money by some Christian missionaries. Whatever might be the reasons behind her apostasy, Tariq refused to believe that her conversion was genuine. Therefore, he was absolutely certain that he would be able to convince her to rebuke Satan and return to her beautiful religion of Islam. After all, concluded Tariq, Islam was the only authentic, true, genuine, and bona fide religion in the entire universe. Nevertheless, Tariq's cousin brother took the wind out of his sails, when he told him why his girlfriend Inaz had forsaken the beautiful religion of her parents and converted to the distorted religion of her Ethiopian lover. Tariq's cousin brother was known as Khalid Mamoun al-Jabbo. All this time I purposely referred to him as the conjugal partner of the Sudanese Christian girl Mary Akal. This is because he was such a despicable person who fornicated with Mary and on her back called her a black ugly bitch. He also told his friends he enjoyed sex with the Indian hookers more than his ugly Sudanese sex slave. He claimed that, only when he had no money to go to spend a wonderful time with an Indian prostitute at Faris Road, he would call Mary to his apartment and sleep with her. He sarcastically said, he wouldn't be able to fuck her up until he would first become drunk. He also said, he would close his eyes and imagine himself making love with an Indian girl. Many times, he liquored her up and allowed some of his evil friends to have sex with her too. Sometimes, the blind drank Mary got raped by 3 to 5 of his Sudanese friends. That was the malicious person, from whom Tarek had heard the disturbing news of his beloved's driving motive behind her abominable conversion from Islam to Christianity. Khalid Mamoun al-Jabo was like all other Sudanese students who believed that, because of her infatuation towards the extremely handsome Ethiopian boy, Inaz had sold her religion. Now Tarek was also made to believe that, due to a mere lust after a beautiful boy, his beloved sold him too. He too started to despise her and regretted that he came all the way from Egypt for such a cheap girl. She was no more his beloved and lawful wife Inaz, but she became the whore of Babel. He even refused to go and meet her in the church. He said to his cousin brother in front of Mary, when the two conjugal partners told him where he could meet Inaz, that he would never step a foot in such unholy place. For him going to the Christian church was worse than going to a nightclub, a gambling casino or visiting a barn for rearing pigs. He also believed that, the church was worse than a brothel, the temple of demons devoted to idolatrous cult, and the cavern of devils, a place worse than a drinking bar, a den of infidels, a house of ill fame, a dwelling of iniquity, the refuge of devils, a gulf and abyss of perdition. Consequently, this time, Tarek refused to be a saver and rescuer of Inaz. On the contrary, he began to join hands with those who were plotting to spoil her reputation and destroy her life. That Sunday afternoon, Inaz came along with her beautiful Joseph and confronted her former lover. She rebuked him for daring to plot with her evil father and contracted her in marriage without her knowledge, presence and consent. Tarek told her that, her Christian marriage with the uncircumcised infidel Ethiopian boy was invalid and her Islamic marriage with him was lawful. Inaz said to him, the paper that he and her father had created in a mosque in Egypt didn't mean anything to her. She then added, no power or authority in the whole world could separate her from her lover and lawful husband Joseph Abraha. After uttering those challenging words, Inaz took hold of her extremely handsome husband's hand and turned her back to her ex-boyfriend and marched out of the brothel and tavern of Khalid and Mary. Chapter 42. The Nasty Rumors. Inaz, her husband, and Alexander family thought the problem of Tariq's unlawful marriage had ended there. Mr. Vijay and his wife witnessed the confrontation between the angry Inaz and her selfish ex-boyfriend and hence narrated to their Christian brothers and sisters what had happened. They told them that, Inaz's father gave in marriage his already married daughter to her former lover without her knowledge, consent, and presence. His aim, as Inaz correctly guessed, was to force her to forsake Christianity and leave her Christian husband and return to Islam and live with her Muslim husband. Nonetheless, the bold stand of Inaz had frustrated that possibility. Mr. Vijay Alexander suggested to Inaz to punish Tarek for his wicked conspiracy against her. He said, he could convince his police friend, the head of the CID, to arrest, deport, and blacklist Tarek. Nevertheless, Inaz requested him not to do so. She said, she didn't want to punish the boy whom she used to love with every tissue of her body. She believed that, the true culprit was her father. Most probably, her proud father, when he couldn't get a visa to India, travelled to Egypt and enlisted the help of the boy he knew his daughter was madly in love with. Before her conversion, her father used to hate Tarek so much and used to call him by many derogatory and colourful racial words. He treated him and his family like dirt. No matter what, Inaz believed Tarek shouldn't have conspired with her arrogant father and agreed to marry her like someone would buy a jaria from the slaves market at the time of the Prophet Muhammad. Inaz thought Tarek would spend a few days with his cousin brother and then forget about her and return to Egypt. Mr. Vijay Alexander took the copy of that pseudo-marriage contract and found an Arabic translator and translated it into English. He then gave the translated certificate to the pastor of their church and requested him to display it in the bulletin board of the church. The wise man did that because he heard a rumor began to spread among the believers that the Muslim convert Inaz had a Muslim husband, and without divorcing him she had married her Ethiopian boyfriend. The rumor said further that Inaz had enticed the handsome Joseph Abraha and cajoled him in marriage. But now, her Muslim husband came from Sudan and confronted her in public and exposed her deception inside the church. Of course, the Sudanese Mary Akal was the driving force behind that malicious gossip. Wherefore, the good man, Mr. Vijay Alexander, decided to nip that nasty rumor in the bud. Nevertheless, a couple of weeks later, Mr. Vijay Alexander received a frantic call from the pastor of their church. The leader of the church said, Inaz's Muslim husband along with Sister Mary Akal and her Sudanese boyfriend had come to his residence and showed him a marriage certificate in English, which indicated that Inaz Ahmed Salah had married her Muslim husband Tariq Harun Al-Jabo before she had married brother Joseph Abraha. The certificate was an official Indian document and had been issued by a recognized religious Muslim leader in Pune city. Then the pastor faxed the certificate to Mr. Vijay Alexander. Upon receiving the fax and looking at the document, Mr. Alexander became speechless. The pastor decided to call Inaz and Joseph to come and meet him at Mr. Alexander's office. He said he was going to come shortly and bring with him 2 church leaders, his wife, and those 3 Sudanese students. He further said, if Inaz won't provide legal evidence to prove that she divorced her Muslim husband prior to her marriage with her Christian husband, in that case the church would no longer recognize her Christian marriage. And if Joseph and Inaz decided to continue their relation, the church would consider their union adultery and stop them from coming to the church. Unfortunately, that office meeting did so much damage to the reputation of the terribly abused and persecuted Sudanese girl Inaz. Chapter 43. Over my dead body. Inaz and Joseph sat on one side of a big round table inside the office of Mr. Vijay Alexander. Tariq, Khalid, and Mary occupied an opposite side of the large table. Pastor James, his wife Sandra, and 2 assistant pastors, Daniel and Mark, seated together in yet another side of the table. Only Mr. Alexander was sitting by himself at another side of the big table. Pastor James began the meeting by offering a short prayer. Everybody closed his eyes and bowed his head except Tariq and Khalid. Inaz and Joseph weren't informed about the purpose of the meeting. Therefore, they were shocked when the pastor brought with him those 3 Sudanese people. Inaz thought she would never see Tariq again. Although Joseph was not told why he was called over there, still he sensed a snake in the bush when he saw Tariq. Well, Pastor James began the meeting, I have called you all for this private meeting because it has been brought to my attention that Inaz Ahmed Salah was still bound by another lawful Islamic marriage when she married brother Joseph Abraha. Why again this same topic? Joseph responded impatiently. Inaz has been given in marriage to this Tariq without her knowledge and consent. Do you call that marriage, Pastor James? I won't call it lawful marriage if Inaz can supply evidence that her Islamic marriage was nullified prior her marriage with you. Mr. Vijay Alexander has obtained an official translation of that illegal document which this Tariq has brought with him from Egypt and handed it over to you. The certificate carried a later date than our marriage's date. So, what more proof do you require, Pastor James? Can I say a word? Mr. Vijay Alexander asked. Please say on, Pastor James responded quickly. Inaz, Tariq has brought new evidence that you and him got married in Pune city and your marriage was conducted by a recognized Indian Muslim religious leader. Here is a copy of that marriage contract. Neither Inaz nor Joseph had bothered to look at the paper. Mr. Vijay Alexander had tried to make them to have look at it. That wasn't a marriage at all, Inaz shouted angrily. It was a sham marriage. Tariq and I were forced by a wicked leader of the Muslim Brotherhood to conduct that pseudo-marriage. Why didn't you go to the Pune police and got that marriage nullified? Pastor James asked. When Inaz remained quiet, the pastor resumed his words. Instead you travelled to Goa city and celebrated your honeymoon together. We didn't feel the need to lodge a complaint because we both knew in real life we weren't married to each other, Inaz tried to justify herself. But you lived as husband and wife. You traveled to Goa together, stayed in the same hotel room, and slept in the same bed. Was it not every married couple would do? Yes, whatever you have said we did, except having sex. Come on Inaz, the assistant pastor Daniel said surprisingly. How do you expect us to believe two young lovers like you and Tarek slept for many days in the same room and on the same bed and hadn't consummated their marriage? Here is Tarek. You can ask him whether he and me ever had sex even once. Tarek, Mr. Vijay Alexander said, is what Inaz has said true or not? Not true, Tarek responded in a faint voice, but everybody heard him. You are such a cheap man, Inaz shouted. You first conspired with my evil father and conducted that unlawful marriage in Cairo. When I confronted you and exposed your wicked deed in your cousin's apartment, you now went to Pune and brought another certificate of another pseudo-marriage. If, as you have said, Tarek was your lover before you met brother Joseph and fell in love with him, then why didn't you marry him? Pastor James asked. I would if I could, but because we are unmatchable lovers. What do you mean by unmatchable lovers? Tarek is an African Sudanese and I am an Arab Sudanese. Therefore, my Arab family would never allow me to marry a boy from Tariq's tribe. But your father had recently conducted your marriage with Tarek. He did that because he wanted to get me renounce my Christian faith and return to Islam. And also he wanted me to leave my Christian husband. But Joseph also an African, then how come you agreed to marry him? I haven't said I won't marry an African. I have said my parents won't allow me to marry a non-Arab boy. What is wrong with the African boy? It is a cultural problem. You guys would not understand it even if I have to explain it 100 times. If you knew in advance that your parents won't allow you to marry Tarek, then why did you fall in love with him? This question was asked by Khalid Mamoun Alajabo. Inaz knew the cunning Khalid wanted to trap her by her own admission. Before I fell in love with Tarek, I had already been engaged to my first cousin Osama Hashim Salah. Tarek knew about my engagement and therefore he agreed to keep our friendship platonic. You mean that gay and pimp husband of yours who sold you as a sex slave through gambling to 7 of his Saudi friends who raped you inside his house? Khalid spoke in mockery and sarcastic. That is none of your business, Joseph responded in anger. Have I talked to you, Mr. Beautiful Joseph? Please stop these personal attacks, Mr. Alexander interrupted the unpleasant confrontation between Joseph and Khalid. Whatever you may say Inaz, Pastor James spoke impatiently, according to the Indian law you were still married woman when you married Joseph Abraha. You could have gone to jail if anyone had reported you to the Indian police. The assistant pastor Daniel spoke softly, but everyone heard him. Well, Inaz and Joseph. Our church won't recognize your union as a lawful marriage from today onwards. You are welcome to come to church, but not as husband and wife. Just like any other brother and sister, Pastor James concluded his private meeting authoritatively. With all due respect to you, Pastor James. Inaz is the most abused and persecuted girl I have ever met. If I have to listen to you and leave her, she would either kill herself or get killed by those Sudanese Muslim terrorists who masqueraded themselves as foreign students. Brother Joseph, you have misunderstood Pastor James, Mr. Alexander responded at once. He didn't say we Christians have to fold our hands and leave those fanatic Sudanese to kill Inaz for becoming a Christian. In spite of that, as a recognized religious leader, he cannot break the Indian law by recognizing your marriage. Your marriage is unlawful in the eyes of the Indian law. Inaz can continue staying in my house. And as before, I would continue to ensure her safety. But she can't have any physical contact with you as she used to do before. I would never leave my husband Joseph even if the entire world would stand against us. Inaz spoke those words challenging anyone present there. Neither I would leave my wife. Inaz is my lawful wife and therefore only death can set us apart, Joseph confirmed the words of his beloved and challenged the religious authority of his church and the Indian law of marriage. "From today, I am moving to my husband's apartment and I am ready to die in his arms." Through those bold words, Inez had spoken volumes about her deep and unwavering love for Joseph. "No one can touch Inez as long as I am alive. Only over my dead body can those terrorist students reach her." Likewise, Joseph had spoken in volumes and revealed to everybody sitting there how much he loved Inez. Chapter 44. Dehradun Train. Joseph and Inez arrived at the New Delhi General Railway Station after a very long trip, which took them through many towns and villages. Their train was the slowest means of modern transportation in the whole world. The average train would cover the distance between Bombay and the capital of India in 24 hours, but their train took 36 hours. Rajdhani train could cover the same distance in a mere 14 hours' time. But, their Dehradun train was like a slow beast, which halted in every stop. Sometimes, it would stop in the middle of nowhere and pick up poor villagers who just waved their hands to its driver. Only the so-called low castes and untouchables travelled by that turtle reptile. The unjustly persecuted couple had become so poor that they couldn't offer to travel by any other train except the Dehradun train. Inez used to get each month 21,000 Indian rupees from her father. Every month, her father would deposit $300 in her account. After her conversion, her father stopped sending any fund to his apostate daughter. The pride of her daddy was seriously injured when his pseudo-son-in-law phoned him and broke to him the real reason behind his daughter's conversion. He told him that his daughter Inez forsook the beautiful religion of Islam and accepted the corrupted and distorted religion of Christianity because she fell in love with uncircumcised infidel Ethiopian dog. Immediately, the outraged father contacted his daughter's medical college and withdrew his financial support of her study. When he was asked by the college authority for the reason of discontinuing his daughter's education, he said, his daughter did something disgraceful and for that abominable deed, he disowned her. The wrathful father swore by Allah that he would never allow his daughter to continue living with the uncircumcised Ethiopian boy and give birth to a bastard and infidel child. It was Tariq who lied to him and told him, when Inez came and quarreled with him, she had been impregnated by her Ethiopian Christian husband. The father told him, he would travel to Pakistan and smuggle himself through Kashmir border and enter India and come to Bombay and rip off the baby out of his daughter's womb and dash its head against the wall. He also threatened to kill his daughter and her infidel pig. Actually, Tariq became a bitter enemy of Inez. The Sudanese students used him as a deadly weapon against his former girlfriend. They convinced him not to allow the apostate Inez to continue her adulterous relation with the Ethiopian Christian boy. Therefore, Tariq travelled with his contemptible cousin brother Khalid to Pune and through paying under-table cash, he got a copy of his sham marriage with Inez. With money you can buy the Wizard of Oz in India. After that office meeting, Tariq went to an Indian Muslim lawyer and lodged a complaint against his Sudanese wife who got married to another man while she was still his lawful wife. The Muslim lawyer told him, the Indian secular system would not force a woman to live with a man even if he is her lawful husband. In other words, there is no such a law called Hukm al-Tat or Biat al-Tat, the law of wife's obedience or the house of the wife's obedience, in Hindustan. Nonetheless, the advocate informed Tariq, the Indian law might prosecute Inez for her violation of the law of marriage. Joseph Abraha was from a middle-class family in Addis Ababa. He was receiving every month a check of $200. So, with that little money, the couple were facing serious financial problems. They could no longer offer to pay the rent of their Bandra apartment. Consequently, they vacated their apartment and moved to a very far place called Virar. They occupied a poor habitat called a chawl. Only Hurjans and Dalits lived in chawls and slums. From Virar to Church Gate, where their medical college and the international students' hostel were located, the couple needed to travel by local train for 2 hours to reach over there. While they were living in Bandra area, they used to travel to their college for 20 minutes by a slow train and 10 minutes by a fast train. There was no fast train from Virar to Churchgate. Despite the high risk, the couple continued their medical study. Unfortunately, Inaz received a letter from the registrar office informing her that her father stopped sponsoring her education. She then told, if she wanted to continue her medical study, she had to find another source for paying her tuition fees. Inaz informed the registrar office that she had no anyone to support her with financial aid except her father. Accordingly, her enrollment as a medical student was cancelled. Therefore, the poor Inaz became a housewife. But, her husband Joseph continued his medical education alone. That was the sad condition of the persecuted couple when they travelled to New Delhi by the Dehradun train. Their train made 77 stops in railway stations and several halts between stations. It reached New Delhi after 37 hours. It had to travel for another 5 hours to reach its final destination at Dehradun city. Chapter 45. The application. Joseph and Inaz were forced out of their painful sleep by the deafening noises of the new passengers who were forcing their way inside the already crowded train. The ear-piercing screaming could bring dead corpses back to life. The persecuted couple would have missed their final destination, if they hadn't been violently and rudely jolted out of their heavy slumber. When Inaz and Joseph got up from their sleep, they didn't find their bag. Even their shoes were gone. So, the poor couple emerged out of that slow beast without their luggage and both were walking barefooted. Luckily, they weren't deprived of their little money. They were feeling sick and experiencing nausea. They spent very rough night, sleeping like chickens on the rope. They slept on hard wooden seat. Joseph and Inaz remembered their comfortable and enjoyable journey to Goa city when they travelled for their honeymoon and compared it to their hellish trip by Dehradun train. The unjustly treated couple almost wept when they recollected their past happy journey and contrasted it with their current miserable trip. Inaz at last had convinced her lover to travel with her to New Delhi and assist her in applying for a refugee status. After she lost her seat at the prestigious medical college, Inaz would not be able to renew her permission to stay in India. Her student visa would expire by the end of the academic year and she had to produce a letter from the registrar office showing that she was still enrolled in her medical program. Without such evidence, the Bombay police would not renew her permission to stay in the country. In that event, she would be deported against her wish and sent back to her country of origin. In addition to that, Inaz's life became meaningless without anything to do. Furthermore, India would not permit any foreigner to work due to the high employment rate. For those reasons combined with the serious financial problems they were facing, Joseph agreed that his beloved Inaz could apply for a refugee status. Acquiring political asylum in India was same as someone winning a lottery visa to the USA. In a few months the refugees' papers would be sent for resettlement by the UN office to one of the embassies of the USA, Canada, Australia, or New Zealand. Actually, the refugee status had more advantages and privileges than the American lottery visa. Firstly, the resettled refugee would be given a free air ticket by his host country. Secondly, his spouse and children would get visas and free tickets too. He also could apply for his parents, brothers, and sisters to join him in his new paradise. Thirdly, upon their arrival in Canada, they would be provided a free accommodation for 1 year. Fourth, they would be supported financially by the Government of Canada for a full year. In addition to that, they would receive free medical aid and legal aid. None of those benefits and favors were available for the person who won the American lottery visa. Inaz had a very strong case. First, she couldn't return to her country because she apostatized from Islam. As an apostate, according to the Sharia law, she was supposed to be put to death. The Prophet Muhammad said, "Whoever changes his religion, kill him." Second, an attempt to kidnap and send her to Sudan had been hatched inside her Sudanese embassy and carried out by 2 Sudanese diplomats. Those 2 diplomats were in remand in a Bombay jail awaiting their final trial. Inaz had an official letter from Bombay police detailing that hideous plot. Also, she had many articles from the main local newspapers in Bombay mentioning the names and occupations of the perpetrators of the crime. Third, Inaz's lover and Christian husband Joseph Abraha had been badly battered by 5 Sudanese terrorist students when he confessed his love and matrimonial relation with her. She likewise had an official letter from the Bombay anti-terrorist police to prove that cowardly terrorist attack. Fourth, Inaz had received many life threats through anonymous letters sent to her via her medical college's address. Of course, Inaz was also verbally attacked by many Sudanese girls and boys, but she wouldn't be able to prove such verbal persecutions. Before traveling to the UN office, the persecuted couple took a rickshaw and requested its driver to take them to a place where they could buy affordable shoes. After covering the nakedness of their feet, Joseph and Inaz took another rickshaw and went to the UN office. They were given a huge form which contained many necessary and unnecessary questions. They took very long time to answer those questions. Inaz's application was supported by a huge dossier containing detailed information about her problem and her person. She then was given a date for her interview by a legal representative of the UN. She had to return after a week time for that interview. Inaz tried in vain to shorten her stay in New Delhi. She informed the UN office that because of her conversion from Islam to Christianity, her father stopped his financial support and due to that her husband and she were scraping up pennies to meet their basic needs. As a practical example, she said, a kind Indian neighbor allowed them to use their refrigerator to store food and cook on their electric stove and wash their clothes and linen in their washing machine. She also gave many sad stories explaining their miserable situation, but all her tales fell in deaf ears. She was told there were hundreds of applications submitted prior to hers.